Welcome, everyone. On behalf of our partners, UW CoMotion, as well as the Office of Postdoctoral Affairs and the UW Graduate School, welcome to today's workshop entitled Exploring Career Paths, Taking Your Research to Market Impact. My name is Bill Mahoney, and I'm the Associate Dean for Students and Postdoc Affairs. And this program was envisioned pre-COVID, if we can remember back that far, following a conversation that Magali Eaton and I had, and she's the Assistant Director of Innovation Training for UW CoMotion. We were discussing common questions that we'd encountered when we talked to postdocs and sort of their career needs and things that they wanted additional training in as they made their choices about what to do after their training was complete. And it was clear to us that we needed to move beyond simply saying that postdocs are qualified and ready for any career, whether it's in academia or outside. We need to move towards giving clear career advice and learn lessons from people who've made that successful transition outside of the academy. And luckily, we're situated in Seattle, and we have a number of really highly qualified and engaging folks right within our own community. You're going to hear from 4 of them today. I'll leave their introductions for later on. But the plan for the session is as follows. Magali, who's going to talk to us about some of the 4 major decisions and career paths that people take when they have an idea for either starting a company or deciding whether to move and start their own company or join another company. They'll then be followed by a facilitated discussion with our 4 esteemed panelists led by Fiona. And then we'll have an open question and answer period. And we encourage you, I believe, to use Poll Everywhere for that. And we'll come up with that link when the time comes. So sit on your questions early on and write them down. And you'll have an opportunity to share those when we get to the latter part of this. I do want to take just one quick minute to thank everyone that played a role in bringing this together. Obviously, Magali for CoMotion and her team of Karen and Devin and Fiona, and then Zion Bai and my team in the Office Postdoc Affairs. This is a group effort and one that we hope will continue in the future, and we hope you enjoy today's presentation. So with that, Magali, please take it away with your brief presentation.
All right, thank you, Bill. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Hopefully we won't have too many hiccups and things like that, because you all know you're figuring this out. We are also figuring this out. So thanks for being with us. This is exciting. I figured I would not assume that everybody has used Poll Everywhere before. So I am actually going to share my screen and start with this before I jump into the paths that our innovators usually take to bring their ideas to market impact. So let me share in this format. And it shows that it's loading on my end. So hopefully, can you see the content of the slide? Yes, okay. So all you need to do is either on your browser or on your cell phone, if you have your cell phone with you, you can go to pollev.com, or you can download the app if you have the app, and enter ComTrain as the ID, essentially, that you go in. And this will allow you to do a number of things. Right now, we're going to test it to see if you guys are able to enter things in Poll Everywhere. And if you're not, don't hesitate to send things in the chat, and we can try to figure out what is working, what's not working. But if you go to pollev.com on your browser or on your cell phone and enter ComTrain, throughout the presentation, you'll be able to, well, first answer this practice essentially question that we're going to try in a second, and then put in your question and answers. And the advantage of Poll Everywhere is that you guys get to see what other people enter, and you get to see, to say if it's top of mind, to kind of vote it up. And we'll go with the question and answers based on that, on what you enter and what people have upvoted as the questions that are most top of mind for you guys. Let's try Poll Everywhere then. Take a second to get onto it. So pollev.com /comtrain. And let's see if you guys can answer this question of where you guys are. All right. And consulting on the side, do we have any debugging coming in, team? All good? Okay. Awesome. That's cool. We get to see where everyone's from. All right. So it looks like we don't have any major hiccups so far from everyone entering things. I'm going to give you another few seconds and then we'll go on to the paths. And again, if you run into any trouble, if you have a question and you can't enter it into Poll Everywhere or can't access Poll Everywhere, please tell us in the Q&A and we'll try to get back to you. All right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what's going on today. A little bit about me. I spearhead training out of the University of Washington Commotion, and I've done a bunch of things at the university. I teach law in the law school as well, and I joined the university through this this program called the Entrepreneurial Law Clinic, which pairs up entrepreneurs, low-income entrepreneurs, with law students that themselves are being paired up with attorneys who volunteer their time to help with intellectual property issues. Now, why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because you have basically, if you are interested in commercialization, you're going to be entering a cool ecosystem at the university with lots of resources for you guys, and I'm going to daylight a few of them for you today. I guess that's my part here, is to daylight some of those resources that you have and kind of make you understand who are the various players inside the university who do different things. So let's start with Commotion, which is where I sit today most of the time, where I spend most of my days. Commotion's the collaborative innovation hub dedicated to expanding the economic and societal impact of the university. What does that mean? That means we do a number of things to serve university innovators, academic innovators. So you might get to interact with us. And if you don't interact with us, we'll know to put you in contact with the folks that would be the right folks for you guys. So what we do generally is those 4 different activities. The first activity at the top that you see is the activity that's traditionally called tech transfer. So that means that if you come up with your research with something cool, a cool activity, you would enter through this group. You would talk to the folks in this group, which is the group that Fiona Wills is the head of. And what they would do is they would take you by the hand essentially and kind of help you think through, do you need to file a patent, or do you have a copyrightable material? What are the various paths that you can take to bring this thing into the world? And they really have one-on-one interactions with you essentially, and your team that you put together to help you push whatever it is, this thing that you have, this cool thing that you have forward, and bring it out into the world. Back essentially this activity, a number of other activities are there. One of them, innovation training. So this is kind of the thing that I do that I spend most of my days on, is to help you bring skills, is to help you today essentially figure out what commercialization even is and what this thing is and whether this is something that might be for you as a career path. We also have funding available for folks that are kind of going through this thing to help them push things forward. And for those that actually spin out of the university and create startups, we have startup incubators where they can sit in. And if you have any questions, I think David, you might be the only one, but one of our speakers today actually has his startup located at one of our incubators. And incubators also give services to startups. So that's kind of what we do. Now let's talk a little bit about what you would do as an innovator coming into this. There are 4 primary paths that innovators usually take to bring something out into the world. The first one is they have this cool technology. They're going to try to find an existing company to take that technology on and create a product out of it and put it out into the world. That's one model that our innovators use. Another model that they use is they're going to essentially spin out a startup out of the university and take that technology or that research that they've done and put it into the startup and have the startup create the product that is sold then out to customers. By startup, we don't necessarily mean for profit. And Katya is a great example of that. Katya, what she has explored first is a nonprofit, actually, that she's running with the research that she's been doing. A third thing is building an internal business at UW, which means that basically your research stays at UW, and what you're going to be doing is selling it directly out of the university, or licensing it, or basically giving it out of the university directly to folks who need it. And the last one, open distribution, is basically you're just putting this thing that you created out into the world for free. So those are the 4 paths that most innovators take when they have something cool that they came up with. And now there are reasons to take one or the other of the paths. And I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes letting you know, like, why wouldn't it, a researcher from the UW choose one or another one of the paths? So let's start with licensing to an existing company. Now, the idea of licensing to an existing company is you take your research, you're going to build it up a little bit, and you're going to get it ready and find a company that's interested in taking it on and building a product out of it. There are 2 main reasons why you might want to do that. The first one is that company is an established company with an expertise, and they might be better suited than you are to take this thing out into the world, and they might do better with it. The second reason would be that whatever you have, your cool technology or research that you're working on, might not be a full-on product. And let me give you an example of something that's been successfully spun out of the university this way a little while ago. So researchers from Western Washington University and UW collaborated and invented this solar panel technology, essentially, that is transparent. So think about if your window could be a solar panel and yet be transparent. That's what their technology is. It's this material that is able to absorb solar energy, but it's transparent, and so it could be used as a window. They chose to license it to a manufacturer of solar panels because this is a technology that needs to go on to something bigger, right? If it is going to be a solar panel of a certain kind, you need to all of a sudden manufacture the windows, for instance, and they did not want to go into the business of manufacturing windows. So they chose a company who would be able to do that for them. And so what they did is they took their technology, they perfected it, and then they gave it to this company who was then going to sell products to consumers. Another path, licensing to a new startup. So that is what you're going to hear from folks who majorly are doing this today in the panel. And this is something you will do if whatever you have has a significant market opportunity, which means you have a lot of people who need this thing and who are willing to pay for this thing. You have to be willing to go for it. This is something that's a little bit more risky and a lot of work. Or a company is not going to be licensing your technology until you're at a certain level of development. So it's particularly true if you think about it for instance, in the life sciences. Let's say you invent a cool new medicine, you're going to have to prove at a certain point that your molecule is really going to do truly what you think it's going to do before a company and a pharmaceutical company will want to take it from you. And let me try to change my slide. We've had some very successful startups out there, and they're in various things. The first 2 are actually software solutions. The one at the bottom is the therapeutic. And so we have a mix of things that come out of UW that choose to become startups. Build an internal UW business. That's usually done by researchers who have whatever they're working on is complementary to their actual research, and so they decide to keep it at the university, both as a research tool and then something that they make available into the world. And so that's generally what people who choose to build a UW internal business are working on. They're things that are applicable to research in addition to applicable to practitioners. And another reason why you might want to stay inside UW is if whatever you're working on would benefit from staying inside UW and would get a significant benefit from staying inside UW. And here's an example, drug interaction solutions, which is also called DIDB for the people who are familiar with it. And what this is it's essentially a database of all of the drugs and how they interact with each other. So this is obviously a research tool that's being used by scientists, but it's also something that now has become the world gold standard of drug interactions. It's being used by the FDAs of most countries in the world. It's being used by big pharma. It's being used by everybody who works on that kind of stuff. And the fact that it stays at the university gives it this aura of neutrality, in addition to being something that is also used for research. So there's a lot of reasons why it stayed at the university. And the last thing, which is distributing for free, is generally, you're not going to get any money from it, but it's going to help a lot of people. And so you just want to put it out there for people to be able to use. And that could be a choice that researchers can make as well. And this is an example that probably many of you have used at some point or another in your life. This came out of the university and was just given to the public for free as something for the public to use. With that, just the last thing I would leave you with, and you'll hear a lot more from our panelists, is in whatever choice you make, there are a lot of things that you need to think about if you want to go into commercialization. I mean, right now you're in research. Commercialization is a great thing because it can allow you to create a job for yourself out of your own research. So it's kind of cool, but it does have a lot of question marks that go with it, and a lot of questions that you need to answer for yourself as well as to what it is that you would want to do, and what you're comfortable doing and what you're interested in doing. To give you just a very brief framework on how to think about this, generally licensing to an existing company or giving it for free to the world, we'd call that a half marathon, because you don't have to develop your product and your research and build the skills to really commercialize as much as building an internal UW business where you're basically running a company from inside the UW, or creating a startup where you're actually either running the company if you become the CEO, or at least running a part of the company. So you really truly are running a company at that point. And so it's a lot of work. And so if we look at it, this is kind of the way that we look at it, basically licensing to an existing company. Once you find the company takes it on and may or may not do something with it, but that's the intent, is that they'll take it on and build a product with it. So your involvement at that point winds down, essentially. You give them advice and things like that to try to get them going, to make them going, but you don't need to sustain the level of involvement that you have at the beginning. Versus startup or you'd have internal business, you're running a business, so you really are going to have to spend a lot of time with it, and open distribution as well. Once it's out into the world, you don't need to be as involved. And I will leave you with just this great quote from one of our researchers that it takes 10 years to become an overnight success, which just lets you know that no matter what, and I'm sure you'll hear that from the panelists, but this is an exciting adventure. This is something that's probably that they're finding a lot that they're learning from, but it does take a while, and it is an endeavor and kind of a career choice. And with that, I will go on this slide, which should activate the poll on the back end, allowing you to answer any questions during the panel. So feel free to start entering questions at any point. This should have activated the poll, and I will then give the floor to Fiona to take it on.
Thank you. My name is Fiona Wills, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Innovation Development and Commercialization here at UW.
Fiona, I think you're muted.
Okay, we'll try that again. I'm Fiona Wills, and I'm the Associate Vice Provost for Innovation Development and Commercialization here at UW Commotion. And Magali mentioned that Commotion undertakes a broad variety of activities to support the commercialization efforts of the UW students, staff, faculty, researchers. The Innovation Development team in particular, they work to advise on the path to commercialization. And in addition to intellectual property strategy, protection, and licensing, we specialize in guiding researchers on the next steps and on available resources as they move their UW work towards market impact. So as all of you are considering whether or not you're interested in this path, we would love to talk to you. Today, I am joined by 4 researchers who are in various stages between completing research milestones while at UW in order to ready the project for spinning out and actually running the startup company and attracting customers. So we ask you to join me in welcoming Greg Newbloom, Katja Sharakamuli, David Younger, and Stephanie Berger. And what we thought would be fun is when you start getting training on how to do a startup, one of the things that you're asked to do is think about what an elevator pitch would be where you can describe yourself and your work. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists today to give us the elevator pitch on themselves and then the elevator pitch on their product that they're trying to take to market. So Greg, why don't we start with you?
Great. So my name's Greg Newbloom. I got my PhD in chemical engineering from the UW in 2014. My background is really in self-assembly and characterization of nanomaterials. And going through kind of PhD and postdoc, I really had no clue what I wanted to do next because I enjoyed doing a lot of different things. But I've always enjoyed the challenge of entrepreneurship. So I started my first company when I was 10 years old, selling snacks at my brother's baseball games. And I really like being able to provide tangible solutions to problems that people have. And for me, science was really a more recent kind of passion career choice. And so being able to spin out a company from the UW was and kind of the path to entrepreneurship was really an opportunity for me to blend those concepts together. Doing that, after my PhD, I spun out a company from the UW called Polydrop, and we quickly went bankrupt. It was a technology that wasn't really ready. We didn't have a strong team. We didn't really know much about how to run a business, and correspondingly, we maybe arrived at the obvious end result there. But I actually ended up coming back to the UW as a postdoc for 2 years and developed the core technology that Membrion is now commercializing. So that was about 4 years ago. We've since raised $7.5 million in equity, $2.5 million in grant funding. We've got a team of about 10 people, and entrepreneurship is an absolute blast. And so I'm really excited to be able to share more about that journey with all of you today. And Fiona, did you want me to go directly into my company pitch or hold off?
Yeah, no,
okay.
Go directly, please, yeah.
Absolutely. So my company is Membrion. We develop and manufacture ion exchange membranes for a variety of applications. So one of the things that we like to say is that Membrion's found the solution to clean and abundant water hiding in the bottom of a beef jerky package. And really what we've figured out how to do is to turn those silica gel materials, those desiccant packs, into a way to purify water while improving energy efficiency and lowering capital costs. So fundamentally, the problem that we're solving is that industrial water treatment processes throw away 2.6 trillion gallons of water during their purification process each year. So that's $21 billion literally thrown down the drain. Electrodialysis is a technology that's really well suited to address this problem, but it's currently too expensive. And that's where our membranes come in. Our ion exchange membranes get used in electrodialysis systems, and they improve the performance and lower the capital costs to make them 45% less expensive to implement. So ultimately what that means is that when you use our membranes in one of these systems, you'll recover up to 90% of the water that's being wasted, delivers a 22% lower levelized cost of water, so water becomes cheaper for everybody, and there's a 12-month return on that investment. So to date, as I mentioned, we've raised $10 million, a little less than 4 years from initially commercializing the technology. Lots of demand, really no sales at this point. We actually are kind of in a chicken and an egg scenario where we have to be able to provide the manufacturing capacity to sell. So we have lots of demand for our product, and we currently raised our A round to go build that pilot scale manufacturing facility. So that construction's underway, should be finished in Q4 of this year, and then we're excited to be able to deliver commercial volumes of membranes to our customers. In the next 2 years, we're looking to be cash flow positive. So certainly on the track, and yeah, excited to share more. Thanks, Fiona.
Thanks, Greg. That's fabulous. Continuing the water theme, Katja, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Hey, so my name is Katya Cherakamilli, and I just completed the Commercialization postdoctoral fellowship at UW recently. I actually got my bachelor's and PhD degrees both at UC Berkeley. And in undergrad, I studied environmental sciences and got minors in global poverty and practice and energy and resources. And this sort of training helped me understand broader frameworks, conceptual frameworks of how global development is working today and in the past. And I got to do research related to renewable energy, studying the impacts of climate change on wildflower ecology in the Rocky Mountains. I got a lot of experience working in lab and also in field settings. And for my PhD, I decided to pivot away from environmental sciences and study environmental engineering in the Civil and Environmental Engineering department. And I was one of the first graduates of this program called Development Engineering, which is a really new up and coming field that encourages technically trained scientists and engineers to consider other aspects outside of technological innovation. That's only the first step if you really want to do impact-driven research and commercialize technologies. So this field of development engineering trained me to think about market forces and working and engaging with communities and thinking about the culture and financial sustainability of technology as it's applied in the field setting. And so this led me, after getting a lot of analytical training in water chemistry at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and Molecular Foundry, I had a really strong stronghold on how to design low-cost technologies. And what I wanted to learn throughout my postdoc experience here at UW was to really think about how to scale up and implement and pilot these technologies to see their performance in the field. And so I applied for the Commotion Innovation Fund and later on was funded through the Commercialization Postdoc Fellowship. And I founded my nonprofit, Global Water Labs, a few years ago with the mission of trying to transfer technical expertise to existing water service providers in resource-constrained and impoverished regions. Most of my work thus far has focused internationally. I've done field pilots 2 years in 3 countries, Tanzania, Kenya, and India, which are severely affected by groundwater fluoride contamination that's naturally occurring and causing irreversible crippling deformities in almost 200 million people, predominantly children worldwide. So this was kind of the motivation for me to both do my graduate research, develop the technology, and scale it up. So I'll tell you a little bit more about the technology itself and the kind of work that my nonprofit does when we're going through the question answer period later with Fiona.
Thank you very much, Katya. Stephanie, would you like to talk next?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Stephanie Berger. I'm a translational investigator at the Institute for Protein Design here at UW. So I'm probably kind of the earliest person in this process out of the panelists today. To give you a little bit of my background, I did grad school in David Baker's lab at the UW, where I started out, in protein engineering, starting out on a cancer-related project. So I designed completely de novo proteins that bind and inhibit proteins that are related or involved in cancer. But the problem there was that I designed these nice and bioactive proteins for targets that were inside a cell. And so that's a huge technical challenge from translating that work into a reality in the clinic. And so that kind of got me thinking at the end of my grad school experience, how can we apply computational protein design to projects where the translation is a little bit more feasible. So we started thinking about extracellular protein targets, and that led us to a handful of targets involved, particularly as it happens in autoinflammatory diseases. So I moved on to do a couple of years of postdocing in the same lab to develop that further. And now I'm a translational investigator as part of that program at the Institute. And so to give you a little info on our technology and what we're planning to spin out with. So the idea is we're hoping to use computationally designed proteins as a new drug modality, particularly in this case to treat inflammatory bowel disease. So IBD at the moment is treated by antibody drugs largely that are either infused or injected. So you have to go to an infusion center every 8 weeks, take a day off of work, or you have to inject yourself with a 1/2-inch needle once every couple weeks. So not great options for treating severe disease anyway. So our goal is to design these proteins that are so stable that they can be taken orally and act locally on the inflammation in the gut to treat IBD.
Thank you, Stephanie. That's wonderful. Okay, and David, can you tell us about yourself and your project?
Yes, thank you. My name is David Younger. I'm the co-founder and CEO of A-Alpha Bio. I grew up in a medical family. My dad is a doctor, my mom's a nurse. My older brother is now a medical resident at UCSF. And so I've always been drawn to healthcare and medicine, but also thinking a little bit more broadly about how we can use technology to influence not just one patient at a time, but to have a really much more broad and potentially global impact. I was first introduced to sort of the concept of synthetic biology in high school when we did one of those very simple transform an E. coli cell with a GFP expressing plasmid, and was just sort of blown away by this idea that you can manipulate organisms and don't really have to wait for the evolutionary timelines that you sort of think of sort of very, very slow change from one version of an organism to the next. And since then, I've really always been very fascinated by this idea of how we can use engineered cells and engineered biological systems to transform healthcare and medicine and other fields as well. So went to Rice University in Houston for undergrad, studying bioengineering and economics. And then went straight to the University of Washington, working with Eric Clavens and David Baker, so sort of melding the fields of synthetic biology and computational protein design. And then spent 1 year after finishing my PhD as a Commotion Fellow, so supported by the Commotion Fellowship Program as well as a gap fund. And ultimately, the product of my thesis work and then that additional year enabled me and my co-founder Randolph Lopez to spin out A-Alpha Bio. So A-Alpha Bio is a drug discovery company. So we use synthetic biology and next generation sequencing to revolutionize the way that new drugs are developed. So we've developed a platform that we call AlphaSeq that allows us to quantitatively and really comprehensively map large networks of protein interactions in a really comprehensive way. So this is really important for developing small molecules and characterizing small molecules that influence protein interactions, and is also very important for helping to discover, optimize, and characterize biologics or protein-based drugs that function through binding to other proteins. So we can increase the industry's ability to characterize protein interactions by orders of magnitude. We are focusing primarily now on partnering with pharmaceutical companies, both for small molecule and biologic programs, with some really exciting opportunities in the next couple of years to start internal drug discovery programs of our own. We've raised $2.8 million in VC funding, and a little over $1 million in non-dilutive funding as well. We have a team of 6. And we're based out of Fluke Hall, the incubator space on campus. So very excited to be here and share some of these experiences.
Well, thank you, David. And all 4 of you, that was just fabulous. And the great thing is now everybody who has joined us today knows why why we love working with you and why we love our jobs. Because it's just always such a pleasure to be working with people who both are passionate and are very committed to moving their projects forward. So my first question I'm going to address to you, Greg, and you're actually probably the furthest along, but I want you to think back when you were just first identifying a project that perhaps would work as a commercialization project. And what did that look like? At what point did you know that maybe you were actually working on something that you could develop further and take to market?
Yeah, I think I didn't, when I was in kind of both cases with Polydrop and with Membryon, didn't really set out with the idea of like, I'm going to build something that could be used. I mean, most of my research is just sitting on a shelf, and someone can read it in my thesis, but no one will. And so, there's this concept of eventually we stumbled across something that was interesting, right? It was different enough that it got us to say like, okay, well, what if like this increment could be pushed just a little bit further? Like what if we could take just one or two more steps beyond this? Then maybe that's something that's really exciting. And so I think that, some of that really came into kind of leaning into discussions out in the marketplace and really understanding like what do people value, what do people need, and so I think that once we kind of had some early results and inklings, then a lot of it is just okay. Well, if we can really like extrapolate on what we're seeing, is there a business here? And I think that that's really like in a nutshell. As an entrepreneur, you really have to have that like desire to bring something new to the market and run a business. And I think it's similar to the concept of being in academia, where if you don't have a really strong desire to do that job, you're going to hate it, and you might as well do something else. And so I think that it's kind of those combination of things of having that desire to do that, and then also just kind of recognizing when something is far enough off that it has the potential to be disruptive.
Yeah, that's terrific. And Greg would love to talk to any of you that would like to know if your project is has a market puller. I'll volunteer you. My next question I was going to address to Katja. There's lots of paths that people take in terms of where their project comes from. You actually started your project at another university and then came to UW and continued it. Were there any challenges or opportunities that arose by changing institutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So just to reiterate what Fiona was saying, I worked on the project that eventually was the foundation of my nonprofit Global Water Labs when I was a graduate student at UC Berkeley. So I developed a low-cost method to remove excess fluoride from groundwater, and the very fundamental scientific discovery of how the material interacted with the contaminant to adsorb and remove it was filed as a patent when I was a graduate student. So technically the intellectual property was owned by UC Berkeley, the California Board of Regents, and the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, but it was only filed in 2 countries, in India and the United States. So in the rest of the world, which also suffers from fluoride contamination, we had the freedom to operate because the knowledge was already in publications and it was in the public domain. And so initially, when I first moved out to Seattle, I was thinking about the different models for commercialization, including connecting existing companies to potentially secure a license from LBNL to actually scale up this work. But after talking to different entities here in Seattle, I quickly realized that there was kind of a vacuum in terms of this desire to address geogenic contamination. Everyone was either focused a lot in the sanitation space, like the Gates Foundation, for instance, or more so in the behavioral change and biological contamination side of things. And so recognizing this kind of gap, I decided to start my own foundation. And I had to have a lot of clear discussions about and create a transparent discussion with my previous PI and research group to make it clear that I was taking it in a new direction and that the field work I would start conducting to test this would be in different locations. And in fact, I was the only grad student that had started the project and no one really took it on after I left. So it wasn't too difficult to kind of shift away from Berkeley. But one of the most important ways in which I addressed certain challenges, which I'll describe shortly, was through forming important key partnerships here in Seattle. So I spent a lot of time doing informational interviews and seeking out mentors actively in a lot of the NGO and foundation space here. So I talked to people at the Washington Research Foundation, at PATH, Global Good, the Gates Foundation, and industries like Cascade Designs. And eventually, I basically found board members and advisors that were really pivotal in terms of helping me find a new lab and office space so that I could start my experiments, but also have the right international connections to do this piloting work. So I would say mainly communication and partnerships were the two key factors that allowed me to transfer the project out of one institution to another.
That's terrific. I will say that your point about well, both those are important. Always the communication. We see that even within UW, making sure that other people who might be somewhat involved in the project are really aware of what's going on. So that's a fabulous contribution. Thank you, David. I'm curious. Before you actually started commercialization, what did you know about it, and how did you start to learn about it?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, not a whole lot. I think that I was really fortunate to be co-advised by Eric Clavens and David Baker, and both of them had placed an emphasis on commercialization with other programs, other projects in the lab. So I was definitely aware that it was a possibility. I saw Eric sort of building up this cost center and commercializing this software that had been developed in the lab. I saw companies spin out of the Baker Lab left and right, like Cyrus and Arzeda and many others since then. And so I think that sort of initial exposure was kind of like, oh, okay, this is something that's possible. And then, had a conversation probably 3 years into graduate school after we got our first positive preliminary data on the platform, and it's sort of like, okay, this really could work and could be impactful. Had a meeting with Ryan Buckmaster, and just sort of went in as a totally dry sponge of what do we do now, not really having any sense for what the options were, or what it looked like to move intellectual property forward. And so it really was from some of those initial conversations that started to sort of put this idea in my head of like, okay, yeah, this technology is not yet far along for some other company to use it effectively. In order for this to have impact, it really needs to be driven from the inventors. And so we felt that was the most effective way to push the technology forward, and ultimately what we decided to do. And it's been a fantastic journey ever since.
Oh, terrific. We'll have to think about reusing your dry sponge analogy. That's good. Stephanie, you mentioned that you started as a PhD student and did your postdoc in the same lab. Were there any challenges or opportunities that arose from taking that path towards commercialization?
Yeah, so I think, the conventional wisdom is that you should do a postdoc somewhere else, not where you did your PhD. And I think that makes sense for an academic career path. But I think in my case, what I wanted to do was really best done at the Institute. And I think maybe that could be a more general theme for people who are commercialization focused, because what I needed to do is really dig down into the project that I was focusing on more. And I happened to be at a fantastic institute, an excellent place to work, where I had the opportunity to push myself as a scientist too, and have some opportunity for scientific, personal development in that sense. So I don't feel like I really missed out. There are certainly decisions that you have to make and a give and take of that. But I would say the kind of conventional challenge there wasn't really an issue. And certainly I've had just a ton of opportunity being associated with the Institute toward translating or translational research and commercialization.
Maybe I'll sort of skip to something I was going to ask later, because you've mentioned the Institute for Protein Design. It certainly is a tremendous resource. Do you want to talk a little bit about that environment and what makes it special and supportive for people trying to spin out their projects?
Sure, yeah. So now the Institute has a special program called the Translational Investigator program for people who are focused on commercialization, specifically to support them. So that involves working, or the ability to work with some professional staff that we have. in terms of drug design, which is, what would be the primary thing that's translatable from the Institute, so that would be working with our process development core. So getting a method in place for, not to get too nitty gritty, but getting a method in place for production of your drug. You have to be able to make it in the quantities needed for your IND enabling studies and downstream, phase 1 clinical trials. So that's not something that's usually done in an academic setting, but we're really set up for that, especially at the Institute. So resources like that. And then of course, kind of the intangible things like our director of strategy is great. Lance Stewart has a history in local biotech and has been a fantastic advisor. And then being at the Institute and, David's the leader of the Institute. So with that, we get access to bigger pharma companies and philanthropists, and not only is that access nice for future partnerships or what have you, but also it's great to have an opportunity to kind of hone your story, because I've had a lot of opportunities over the past couple of years to present to people, which is an excellent opportunity and not something that everybody has readily available.
Yeah, it was terrific. Thank you. Thank you very much. Katja, I'm curious about the advice that you find yourself giving people at this point, because you've been working on your project for a number of years now. So if somebody isn't sure if it's the right time or the right project, but they want to see, they want to see what moving from research to market might look like, what recommendations do you give them?
Yeah, so a few things. I think it's important to do a little bit of customer discovery. So one of the quick and easy things that you could do if you pull together a team or at least a partner is to apply for NSFI. And there's site awards, which are about $2,500, and you can use this to actually test. First, you through Commotion at UW, you can go to workshops and learn what it means to actually brainstorm and draft a business model canvas using the lean business model method to see who are your customers, where are your values that you're providing to the market, what are the different supply chains, how will you fund different projects, and so on. And so going through that brainstorming exercise and then actually conducting interviews with potential customers is an amazing way to really understand if the technology that you're working on or the project that you're sort of starting to conceptualize is going to be impactful or wanted or needed to address someone's pain point in the real world. So connecting with real people in the real world, getting out in the field, getting on the phone and talking to them would be one really important way to understand if you're doing translational research that can be actionable. And one other thing would be to talk to different mentors. You can get linked up through the Commotion Network to tons of industry and academic mentors that have expertise in the specific fields and technologies that you might be working on. Also, talking to the innovation managers at Commotion is a helpful way, like David Younger was mentioning. And finally, it's really useful to talk to PIs and postdocs who have done translational research to really understand what it means, because it's quite different than being in academia or in graduate school, and the roles and responsibilities and challenges that you'll face are kind of something that you don't really learn in a traditional academic environment. So you want to be prepared and ready to see if you're a good fit for that type of challenge.
Super helpful. Thank you, Katja. Sort of sticking with advice, Greg, you mentioned that Membrion is your second startup, and other than going bankrupt, what lessons did you learn from your first startup that really helped you think about doing your second one differently and being successful?
There's a few different things that I came away from that with. I think that as Katja was saying, really being engaged with your customers is super important. I think one of the most common things that comes out of an academic setting is that you have an amazing solution, and so you want to go and basically convince people how amazing it is. And there's a million different reasons why someone in the market won't buy your solution that have nothing to do with how amazing it is. And sometimes you're just not solving the thing that's actually keeping them up at night. You're not actually solving their their first kind of priority. And so really going out and talking to customers and understanding, is this are you solving the problem that is their sole focus right now? Or, are you solving something that's nice for them to have that they don't really care about? And so I think that, doing that, getting in front of customers, being able to actually get someone to pay for what you're offering, being able to provide people with samples and allowing them to be ready to fail are all really important things that I think I walked away with. As entrepreneurs, one of the things that we have is a habit of being overly optimistic. And so I think especially as when it comes to our technology, figuring out how to break your technology, we all kind of know in the back of our minds that area that if you stuck this in water, it wouldn't do well. So we'll never test it in that real world environment, right? Because it's going to have a problem. It's better to break your technology and assess this is never going to work. We need to redevelop it. And I think that's something we've done at Membryon. The technology I was working on at the UW, fundamentally the product that we're going to market with now is completely different. We still leverage our initial IP, but we're not using the same thing. And so, I think that being willing to really pivot and build a team that's smarter than you is probably the third attribute. That initially it's really easy to kind of get your friends together and people who are committed to doing something with you, but building out a team of really smart people, especially in areas that you're not as strong, has been really important to Membryon's success, in contrast with my first startup.
Oh, thank you, Greg. So sort of continuing along with what you learned, Stephanie, if you were to talk about the skill that you grew the most as you've been going through this process, what would it be, and what advice would you give others about growing that same skill?
So I think the skill that I've needed to develop the most, and that has taken the most work and spent the most time on, is time management and planning in general, which sounds obvious, but honestly, it just takes a lot of work, or it did for me anyway, or it has. And continues to. So I think, part of that is just broadly laying out your plan, what needs to happen to get from point A to spin out, and sticking to that plan, identifying the time limiting steps and prioritizing those. And then I think it's really critical to build a good intuition for quick decision making, so that you can move that along as quickly as you can. And then no agonizing over emails.
Time management works for everything in life too, right? Yeah, terrific. Thank you. David, I'm curious about your experience with the Holloman Health Challenge and the Dempsey Startup Competition. You did very well in those. Can you talk about this value that those were to your team, and what kind of skills came out of there?
Yeah, both were hugely valuable. So I think, CoMotion has been incredibly instrumental in building AlphaBio from an intellectual property perspective, from a tech perspective. But I think most of the figuring out how to write a business plan and think about financials and kind of all of the nitty gritty of what it means to build a startup. A lot of those things you just have to go through and do it, and sort of be forced to do it before you really need it. If I had waited to give my first pitch to when I was in front of a VC, it would have been really bad. So I think having that sort of a safe academic environment in which to kind of go through those motions and get feedback from the community, where it's intended to be constructive and friendly, and they understand that this is kind of the first time going through the process. It's hugely valuable. So we did the BPC for the first time in 2017, and got our butts handed to us by Membryon, and then came back the next year and did very well, and also did the HIC. Both were fantastic experiences. I think doing it a second time was equally valuable. I think one of the other really valuable things about doing those competitions before we officially spun the company out was those were really the first sort of high pressure situations in which our team was working together. And so it was an ideal opportunity for my co-founder and I to really see, is this going to work? Because you're juggling a lot of balls in the air, you're learning a lot of new things, you're responding to feedback really quickly. You can tell, in not too much time, in that case, just in a couple months, if this is someone that you can really see, all of those late nights with for years to come. So I think that was a huge value. And then I think the final value, if you do place and get some cash, there are a number of opportunities for early financing from Commotion, from grants, but most of them are for very specific purposes, for tech development or for customer discovery. Having some no strings attached money for pursuing intellectual property, for incorporating, for some of those other things that no other strings attached funding will touch, was very, very helpful for getting the company off the ground.
That's super helpful. As you were learning these new skills and going through the process, were there things that you absolutely did not want to do, but were important for the commercialization process and you had to learn?
I think probably the thing that I was most ambivalent about was fundraising. I think as a first-time founder, the idea of giving up control is something that you don't necessarily want to do. The idea of letting someone down financially is scary. I mean, like the idea of taking $2.8 million from people that you've just met in the last couple of months is not an inherently comfortable thing to do. And so I think we realize that in order to build a biotech company, in order to grow at the rate that we wanted to grow, it was something that we absolutely had to do. And so I sort of got comfortable with it. Now I'm much more comfortable with it. But definitely sort of from the beginning, it's sort of the least sort of intuitive thing of like, oh yeah, I want to take other people's money.
It's really hard to take your grandmother's money and then go there for Thanksgiving as well. Yes, that's super helpful. Thank you, David. Katja, you're the person on the panel who's doing a not-for-profit. And also that your primary market is in the developing world. Can you share with us sort of the unique challenges that creates and how you've been going about solving them?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that I always tell my students and mentees and people that work with me on projects is that they have to be ready to just solve problems on the fly and to not be scared of challenges that will come up. Because when you're doing field research and piloting a prototype for the first time, especially in an impoverished and resource constrained region, you're gonna face lots of challenges, no matter how much you prepare. And so when I'm doing field work, I've dealt with issues that are pretty obvious, like not having power, to not being able to get transported to my lab, to having things shut down, to the lab that I was going to collaborate with not having supplies to actually do the experiments, in addition to language and cultural barriers. So these are all things that you get much better at addressing as you have more experience. But one of the ways in which I've addressed these sorts of field challenges of working in a market that is more resource constrained is to make a list of all the potential failure modes before I go and to anticipate them to best prepare for them. So some of the examples of preparation tactics include building a field kit to be able to take as much of the supplies that I don't think will be available there with me in my suitcase, and packing very light and making sure I have the equipment to measure water quality, but also to actually conduct some experiments. And in addition to identifying key champions in the partner implementation field groups that I'm working with and setting up maybe monthly or bi-weekly calls to exchange contact information and sort of have Google Docs where we're organizing and laying out clearly what my responsibility will be and what their responsibilities are prior to the trip and also during the trip. And so those sorts of things have kind of helped deal with some of that friction of working in different places a bit. And in addition to that, I think some of the unique opportunities that I've gained from both running a nonprofit and working in these regions is that you really get to expand your mind and learn about new forms of governance and interact with people from so many different sectors. So I've worked with partners and have spoken to people from the WHO, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, World Bank, different international NGOs, and of course, community members who are directly impacted by these global health crises. And oftentimes I come back being amazed at the concept of reverse innovation, because we often think, having so many fancy labs and tons of funding here in the US allows for the best technological outputs, but that's not necessarily true. Oftentimes using fewer resources and being more ingenious about how you use them can kind of broaden your mind. And finally, one quick thing about the nonprofit side of the question that you asked about advantages and challenges on commercializing through a nonprofit. I'll say that the reason why I primarily chose this business model is because I really think that during the piloting phase, where you're working on something as fundamental as the human right to drinking water, it's really a type of business model that allows you to build community trust with the actors in these regions, including local governments and water service providers in rural areas. And of course, the organization is super mission driven, and we're extremely focused on social impact and environmental and personal well-being. And our operational costs are quite low in terms of the actual technology development and testing. And I would say the largest part of our budget is salary and personnel. And so because we're not selling a physical product, but rather a technical expertise to be able to pilot and scale up a process, it seemed better. And some of the advantages have been, we have access to pro bono legal teams that help us through challenges. And if you're a for-profit company, you wouldn't get that pro bono aspect, and those people charge like $1 zillion an hour. So I would say that's been a huge relief.
Thank you very much. We actually had a question asked from the audience that matches one we were going to ask you, Greg, and so I will ask it now. Apparently not very many people are asking questions, so we'll just remind everybody to go to the website that's on the screen and type in your questions, because you have the opportunity to definitely have them answered. But Greg, for the question that came from the audience, how do you go about identifying and contacting mentors who helped you?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on, it's a lot of kind of self-reflection around and self-awareness around what you need. So, you know, in general, I knew that I was really strong technically, so I didn't need people to help technically with what we were doing, but I did need people to help on the business side. And so that's a lot of initially what I focused on was, you know, who's done something similar to me, you know, maybe a similar business, similar kind of fundraising, traction, timelines. For example, I don't go out and seek out mentors in the tech industry, because they're not going to know how to work with the really long timelines that are present in our industry. And so, you know, it's a lot of like, I think that the Seattle community in particular is extremely generous with their time. Asking someone out for coffee, buying them lunch, like you can easily get 30 minutes to an hour of someone's time just by asking to go and hear their opinion, right? And going and bringing tough questions like, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. This is what I'm working through. How do you think about something like this? People love to talk about themselves, and people are really generous. And so I just encourage people, like, go out, talk to people, ask them if you can pick their brain. You know, normally these sorts of events are great to go up and meet someone afterwards and do that, but it's a lot of just networking and being willing to ask for help from the people that you think are relevant.
Thanks, Greg. I will say that we have not figured out the networking portion of these virtual events at this point. Katja, can you share the role that mentors have played in your project and what to look for in a mentor?
Yeah, definitely. I 100% resonate with what Greg just said about Seattle, the community being very, very open to mentorship. It's one of the few places where I've lived where everyone is so willing to share their knowledge with you and their expertise. And I've been so grateful because they've really helped me figure out my niche and how to move forward with my project. So I think that one mentor isn't necessarily sufficient for all the different things that it requires to really translate and commercialize a technology. And so I've had academic mentors like PIs who I can share scientific progress with, but also board members who I chose particularly based on their knowledge base. For instance, one of my board members has expertise in running a foundation herself that's focused on global development, and she has a lot of expertise in financial planning and forecasting. And the other one is a more technical engineering expert with field expertise. But more importantly, I think one of the things that has helped me is to work both with the Commotion faculty, Commotion mentors like Ryan Buckster, Laura Dorsey, and everyone, and also reach out to people in other entities. For instance, when I first moved to Seattle, I talked to David Schultz at PATH, who now he's the grants director at WRF. But these type of people that hold these positions really have so many connections throughout all the different agencies in Seattle. And so they can really help connect you to other people who can move your project forward. So look for someone who has expertise in your topic and interest in seeing your organization or idea succeed.
Thank you. I'm still busy muting myself at inappropriate times. Another question from the audience is, what was your major motivation for going into a startup instead of an academic route? And what are the gaps between the training for a PhD and going into a startup? Would one of you have a preference that you'd like to answer that question?
I can certainly take a stab at it.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, so I think the main motivation for me was, once we had this platform developed and had validated it, the question really was, do we kind of publish this and let it go and see if anyone picks it up, or do we proactively turn it into a product and commercialize it? We thought that we would have the ability to have a much greater impact through commercialization. I think that the feel of a startup is similar in many ways to an academic lab. I think, I obviously am biased, but I think that there are a number of things about a startup that are much nicer than kind of what I think of as a normal academic lab. I think at the core of it, in an academic lab, so in a normal lab, I think most people are used to having more or less independent projects, or it's a couple of graduate students who are working closely with one another. But there isn't necessarily a single thing, a single vision, a single dream that ties that team together. I think that's really, for me, what most sets Alpha Bio apart from my experience as a graduate student. It really is. We are all in this together. We are a team. It means that scientists don't have as much control over the exact details of their project. We need to be moving in a common direction. We need to be moving towards some commercial goal. And that means that people don't have the same freedom to pursue absolutely any idea that they might want to. But the trade-off there is that everyone is working together, and to me, I find that very, very motivating, very exciting. Yeah, so I think a combination of that kind of close-knit, common sort of unified direction, and the ability to take technology and move it to some major impact.
That's terrific. I mean, and I think it's interesting because identifying your team and bringing team members in is a critical component of being successful in a startup. And then if you're bringing in the right team members, clearly is the reason you want to stay as well. So thank you, David. Stephanie, I know that
I thought,
go on, Katja.
Sorry, I just wanted to quickly add on one more thing. So with regards to the question of what are your major motivations for making startups instead of going into academia? I personally actually still would like a long-term career in academia. I've gone through some faculty searches looking for tenure track assistant professor positions and have interviewed. And what I found during my interviews is that I get extremely positive feedback from the committees with regards to being unique in taking a technology and trying to not just do the innovation side of it, but actually trying to implement and scale it up and field test it. And so in a way, learning how to commercialize technology is an added skill set that even if you do want to become a PI one day or run your own lab within academia, slowly the tide is shifting so that people in different fields are starting to value that attribute as well. So I just wanted to point out that it doesn't have to be a clear black or white situation of which direction you're going to choose. You could think of it as one progress step in your career towards something else.
Thank you, Katja. That's a good point. I mean, increasingly there's a conversation of how commercialization activities should factor into promotion, tenure decisions. I don't think anyone's figured out exactly what that should look like, but it's a very active conversation. Thank you. Stephanie, I know that you're right in the middle of sort of thinking about getting your startup out in the near future out of the university. What are the most important activities that you're currently working on to make sure that's successful?
Yeah, so right now I think what's most important kind of echoes what's been said before here too, but team building. So bringing in expertise that I don't have, that, you know, to get the work done that needs to get done, to move it past the academic stage. So particularly in drug development, there's a ton of work, and I kind of alluded to this before, but there's just a ton of work that needs to be done even after you get your first animal experiment done that says, okay, this could be effective in your disease model. There's so much work that's not typically done in academia. We have the resources, some resources to get some of that work done at the IPD, which is awesome. But there's you know, more work to be done. So I think bringing in experts in those areas is really important. And then at the stage that I'm at, the work just needs to get done. So we're still pretty early, and we're collecting the data that we need to collect before we can start talking seriously to investors. And so in terms of the most important thing that needs to happen on our timeline, the timeline limiting step is just getting it done.
Terrific. Okay, I'm going to go with one of the questions from the audience. Do you have to have a business background to be able to be successful in your startup? Again, I will just open it up as to who would like to answer the question.
I'll maybe toss out a couple ideas. I think that you need to have some basics in order to run your startup. I don't think that you have to have a degree. I don't have a degree in any, or any real, I didn't take any classes. There's a lot that is available to learn, but you have to go out and learn. And I think that's a big part about startups. You have to learn so many different things. You got to learn business. You have to learn the legal side of things. There's so many different topics you have to learn. I don't think you have to be an expert in all of them, but you probably do need someone who has more depth than you in those areas that you are weak in. So, for me, it's bringing along people who are skilled in those areas and, they have a finance background. They can do, financial modeling, pro forma modeling, cost structures for products, things like that. We can compare all of that against runway and make sure we don't run out of money because managing a company is a lot different than managing a personal budget or even a laboratory budget, within the UW. And so I think that you have to have those skills, but you don't have to have a degree or experience as long as you're open and hungry to learn the skills that are needed to make it happen. I think that's really more of a mindset of learning.
Thank you, Greg. There's a question that you guys have touched on, but it has the most number of votes. So I'm just going to ask it and see if you have anything to add. And that's, how can you find mentors? What's your advice on finding mentors? Again, I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, I think there are some people who actively sort of advertise themselves as mentors. There are people that actively, sign up for. So Life Science Washington has a mentorship program called the WIN program. Commotion has a mentor network. There are accelerator programs like Creative Destruction Lab or Jones and Foster Accelerator. There are places to find people who sort of outwardly identify as, I am looking for companies to mentor. Which is fantastic, but you should not feel at all limited to those people. I think most of the mentors that we have had at Alpha Bio have been people that I respect. I mean, honestly, people like Greg, who are a couple years ahead, who've seen a lot of these problems before, who've made decisions around intellectual property and around finding good lab space. And you just ask for help. So it's less about starting some very formal relationship and more just finding people who've done this before, who you respect, and who can offer something.
And to go into a little bit of detail about how you can find those people, I would suggest that all of you go and make a LinkedIn profile if you already haven't done so. Because once you start seeing companies you're interested in, or labs or organizations, and you just go to the My Team page of those websites, you can very quickly just type in those people's names on LinkedIn and see how you're connected to them, and reach out to those in-between connections saying, hey, here's a 3-sentence intro to who I am, what I work on, and what I need help on. Do you mind emailing this person and connecting me? And the people that are kind of out of reach, that are difficult for you to connect any other way, will respond to an email if it comes from somebody that they care about or that they respect. And so that's one way of going about it. And if you actually start working on the project, also, of course, make a website in addition to your LinkedIn profile. And I've also connected to so many different people that have been extremely helpful in just setting up quick Skype calls, like 15-minute calls to talk about a topic, even through Twitter and direct messaging. So really take advantage of social media channels and see what people are talking about in your field, and try to get an idea of where the momentum, what direction things are heading, so that you can be in those conversations. And
Thank you, Katya. There's a couple of questions here that, again, I think we touched on. How do I know if what I'm working on could be commercialized? And how do we know if our research product is valuable enough for a market plan? But I think since the question's being asked, it's worth touching on it again. Stephanie, perhaps you could talk about the steps that you took in your project and how to think about figuring out if a project is right for commercialization.
Yeah, so I guess the first step that I took personally was focusing the technology in an area that we thought was more easily translational or commercializable, and that's an important step. But then once you get into the your area of focus, for example, in inflammatory bowel disease, I think you just have to look into, well, the size of the market, the available competitors. Oh, one thing that we did that was extremely helpful is speak to physicians in that field to get their opinion on would this be valuable? Do you see a potential impact here? And so I think if you have access to key opinion leaders in your field in that area, I think that's, at least to me, that was the most effective way to determine if something was commercializable or worth pursuing further. And then that further pursuit involves a more rigorous look at your competitors in the space and, what their deal with Janssen was or whatever, what that looked like. And is that a path that you might want to take? And, things along those lines.
Thank you. And there's another question about figuring out determining if someone's a competitor. There just are things like workshops and doing things like the I-Corps program that can really help people to flesh out what their business plan could be and what kind of interest there is. So we would just really encourage anybody to be reaching out to Commotion and just saying, hey, we just want to have a chat. We're actually prepared to network too. So please feel free. So before I turn it back over to Magali, just one last question, and I'm going to ask each of you to comment, and feel free to say, to emphasize something you've already said. Given where you are and everything you've done, what would you like to tell people who haven't started on the journey yet? What piece of advice would you like to give them? Start with David.
Sure. Yeah, I think my sort of go-to, I don't know if it's advice or just sort of my thought, my ramble, is that I think scientists and engineers are very well suited for starting companies. I think that, Greg was asked, do you need to have a business background to start a company? You don't need to have a business background. You need to know how to ask questions and get answers to those questions. And I think that is the training that we have as scientists and as engineers. I think that, the scientific method is not exclusive for scientific questions. I think the way that you should approach customer discovery is using the scientific method, right? You have a hypothesis about your market, go out and test it. You don't know something about intellectual property. You know how to read, complex journal articles. You can go out and find those answers. So you won't know everything that you need to know. Nobody does. Even a serial entrepreneur does not know everything that they need to know when they're starting a new company. And I think that the background and skill set of a scientist and engineer, makes us well suited to start companies.
Thank you, David. Stephanie, what are your final thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, so for people who are thinking about, commercializing their technology, I think a good first step is reaching out to CoMotion and going to the website and figuring out next steps from there, as well as thinking of people who have done something similar that you may know and reaching out for advice there. That was helpful in my case. And then I guess the last piece of advice would just be to, if you think it's worth it, stick to it. And it's going to be a lot of hard work, but it'll be worth it, hopefully, if you think it's worth it.
Thank you. Thank you. Katja.
I would say my main takeaways for you all would be to learn how to tell your story of why you are motivated to focus on the specific problem or innovation that you're working on, and learn to communicate it clearly using visuals and relatable language, so that in a few sentences you can very clearly demonstrate to them why the problem exists, how big the problem is, and why you're the right team to solve it. And I would also recommend trying to find a co-founder early on. This is probably one of the big mistakes that I would have changed about how I started the organization. I've worked on a lot of it, both the fundraising side and the research side, entirely independently. And so this forces me to not only be the CEO and founder, but also the COO, the CTO, CFO, and I'm sure this resonates with a lot of the entrepreneurs on the panel, and it can get really taxing. So it's quite important to find the right team of people and to distinguish the fields of expertise that they comprise. And lastly, just be okay with collaboration, no matter what type of business model that you're working on, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit. Just realize that whatever problem it is you're trying to solve, you're not going to solve it alone. And typically we're focused on very large scale issues. So don't be scared to ask for help and to work together with other organizations and other people to try to tackle it in a more meaningful way.
Thank you, Katja. And Greg, what are your final thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as I kind of reflect back on a lot of entrepreneurship, so much of it is not knowing what the future holds, but being committed to taking the next step. And so I think that, even if you're sitting there with an idea in your mind of, oh, I wonder if this could work or not, like entrepreneurship is really just saying, okay, what's the next step I need to take to move this ball forward? And there's no shame at any point in saying, hey, this is not going to work, and I'm going to fold it up. And that's a totally acceptable result. And you're actually way better off than people who don't realize that early on. And so I think that, you're incredibly lucky to be in an ecosystem like the UW. There are so many resources to take advantage of, both through CoMotion and the Berg Center and so many others, just even within the greater Seattle community, that taking that next step, there's a lot of different ways to do that and get the ball moving forward. But that's a lot of what it is. So, I think that my advice is just take the next step, see if, ask yourself the question, is this idea actually worth carrying out, or am I okay with walking away from it? And if the answer is no, I'm not okay with walking away, then figure out what the next step is.
Thank you very much, Greg. That's great advice from all of you. Thank you very much. And I'm going to quickly turn it back over to Magali. have gone over time. She's not going to let me facilitate a panel again. Okay, thank you.
Now I am trying to up and it's sharing absolutely the wrong thing. So I just wanted to share actually very quickly some of the resources that we've been mentioning throughout this entire panel that you should feel free to take advantage of if you want to explore this world of commercialization any further. And let me try again. I'm having trouble sharing my screen here. There we go. All right. So here is just a subset of some of the things that exist. And basically, I want to emphasize from the beginning and the end, if you have any questions, reach out. Reach out to Commotion, reach out to the Burke Center, reach out to Bill Mahoney, reach out to any of us. We all know each other. We'll all point you to the right direction to help you move whatever forward or answer your questions. This is what we're here for. But generally, just to give you kind of an overview of what exists, let's say you are a postdoc. If you're a grad student, you can just also reach out. If you're a postdoc, there are some resources specifically for postdocs. If you want to explore the world of commercialization, there's some fellowships out there that can actually give you essentially grants to pay for a piece of your postdoc and give you some training as part of that. And then you can kind of decide what it is you want to do. If you want to build skills, as part of Commotion, we put together workshops, and I run the I-Corps program, the local I-Corps program. So if you go on the Commotion website and you look for this word, I-Corps, you'll come up with the program. This is just, well, if you have an idea that you think might have potential and you want to test whether it does or not, that's what the I-Corps program is for. So really, you can register until June 5, actually. At this point, it's open, and the next cohort will be running from the end of June to the end of July. And we'll teach you how to do some of the stuff that the panelists have talked about, which is how do you actually get out and talk to customers? Who do you even know who your customers are? How do you model your future company and do a mock-up of it and ask yourselves the right questions, identify the questions to ask, and how to find mentors? We'll network you with mentors too. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of things going on. And then once you have those bases, you can also seek grants. And so on the right-hand side, fund your projects or some of the grants in the ecosystem that are available. But there's so much out there. And so I just wanted to leave you guys with that as just food for thought. If you're at all interested, don't hesitate to go and explore the Commotion website and ask for a consultation, sign up for I-Corps, or look into those fellowships. And so what we'll do actually is we'll send those out with links to them after this workshop. So you'll have access to that and the recording of this workshop, because I don't think we mentioned it, but it's being recorded. So you'll be able to see this again and find the answers that you need in that. So with that, is there any last words from Bill or Fiona, or?
I'll let Bill talk first. I've done.
Oh, I'll just definitely thank personally all the panelists, as well as everyone for joining us today. I think this was a great kind of look behind the scenes about what some of the postdocs could take on if they want to go down this path. So I thank you all for sharing your stories. It was incredibly helpful, and I hope that we will have more of these in the future.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks to everybody who organized to put this event on today, and thank you very much to our 4 panelists, to Stephanie, Katja, Greg, and David. Very much appreciate both your time and the candor, the thoughts you shared today. And for everyone in the audience, Commotion would love to work with you. We love working with innovators and helping guide projects forward. So thank you very much.
Yep, there's not much for me to say beyond that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming on the panel and sharing with the audience. And thank you guys for participating. We hope this was helpful. As a very last thing, if you're willing, you guys, please keep on poll everywhere and kind of let us know how we did and what else you might want to hear about, because that's really, we're putting those trainings on for you guys. So we'll be activating in a second the poll. Kevin? You're able to. So we'll be activating the poll. Please share your experience with us of how we did and what else you might want to hear from us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.